You didn't land here by accident. Something quieter than thought, an echo, a memory, led you to this exact moment. Not a coincidence, but a call. So before we begin, take a breath. Let your shoulders drop. It's safe now to rest in a different kind of story. One not about striving, but about remembering. If you're listening late at night, or from somewhere in between worlds, between sleep and waking, between certainty and surrender, then this message is already tuned to you. Subscribe if something in your body already knows this tone. Tell, use where you're listening from. Let this be a field, not a feed, a shared resonance. Now imagine, what if you weren't here to become conscious, but to remember that consciousness was never lost? What if reality wasn't something to change, but something already responding to your presence? This isn't a lesson. It's a mirror, a frequency, a soft unraveling of everything you thought you needed to earn. And in that unraveling, something ancient awakens, not above you, not ahead of you, but within. Let's begin there. You're not here because of coincidence. You're here because something beyond your usual stream of thoughts, something quieter, older, moved, not loud, not urgent, but precise, like a tuning fork humming under the floorboards of your being. You might have told yourself you were just scrolling, just passing time, but part of you knows time doesn't pass when you're close to the center. It folds, and tonight, or whatever moment this is for you, is a fold, not a distraction, a return, not forward, not backward. Inward dot, and what you're about to hear isn't a message for your mind. It's a whisper meant for the space beneath language, the awareness watching your breath, watching your noticing. You could call it a story, but it's more like an atmosphere. Something you don't follow, something you remember. Not with effort, with recognition. Let's start gently. Let's begin with where you've already been. You've searched for years, maybe lifetimes, in shapes you don't even recall. You've gathered techniques, tried frequencies, adjusted postures and beliefs. You've bathed in sound, in silence, in surrender. You visualized your highest self and doubted you had one. You've raised vibrations only to fall into shadows you didn't know were waiting. You've spoken affirmations that felt hollow, then discovered a wordless presence more real than any mantra dot. And each time something worked. When you felt that brief but piercing clarity, it was like slipping behind the curtain of what you'd always assumed was real. A glimpse, a shimmer, but then the curtain dropped again. And you thought maybe you did something wrong. Maybe you weren't ready. Maybe you forgot the right step, said the wrong phrase, didn't believe hard enough. But what if that wasn't failure? What if the loop was never punishment, but preparation? What if the spiral of seeking wasn't a trap, but an initiation? Every return not a regression, but a deeper descent into the center? Breathe here, because that's the moment that's arriving now. Not a climax, not a reward. A pivot, a soft remembering that the treasure you are chasing was never out there. It was the presence that kept watching you search. The awareness behind the eyes. You don't have to master energy. You are energy. You don't have to chase higher consciousness. You are consciousness, already whole, already awake, pretending to be asleep just to taste the beauty of reawakening. And the test you thought you were failing? It was never a test. It was a reflection. A game of hide and seek where the seeker eventually realizes they were always the one being sought. Let that land for a moment. Just feel that, not in your head, but in your chest, maybe even your bones. The seeking was sacred, but now it can soften. Now you don't have to add more tools to the shelf of becoming. You can sit down. You can exhale. The field doesn't need more effort. It's inviting coherence. And coherence begins when you stop trying to tune yourself and let yourself. Be the instrument. From this place, the quantum is no longer metaphor. The observer and the observed merge. The particle and the wave stop performing for measurement and simply become experience. You are not separate from what you create. You are the space it emerges from. And what used to feel far, dreams, peace, clarity, love, suddenly begins to move closer. Not because you pulled it, but because you finally stopped pushing it away with doubt, with striving, with unworthiness. Let this be your pause point. Let this be your portal. What if, instead of directing your life like a conductor, you let it play through you like a melody? What if the answers you've been waiting for are not behind the next book, the next retreat, the next awakening, but already echoing in the silence you've been avoiding? Strange, isn't it? That silence might be the very voice you've needed to hear all along. So you stop, not out of defeat, but because the game has changed. You're no longer a drop in the ocean trying to understand the sea. You are the ocean realizing it can take any shape it wants. A wave, a tear, a breath, a name. And as this realization lands, time begins to feel different. Events don't happen to you. They happen through you. You're not reacting anymore. You're receiving, not planning. Listening. And with that shift, even desire changes flavor. It stops being the ache of what's missing. It becomes the quiet suggestion of what wants to move through you next. You're not trying to manifest things anymore. You're dancing with them, playing with possibility, not because you need more, but because you finally understand that creation is not fixed for lack. It's an expression of presence. Every desire now becomes a doorway, not to acquisition, but to awareness. You want. Not to escape the now, but to deepen into it. And in that space, and now becomes vast, endless, alive. Even memory becomes something softer. Not a chain of identity, but a ripple in the field. You stop using the past to define who you are and start letting presence rewrite the story in real time. And the future? It stops being a forecast of effort and starts becoming a canvas of coherence. You settle, not out of resignation, but out of recognition. You are not the image in the mirror. You are the mirror. And when that knowing becomes your resting place, not just a concept, but a tone, a breath, something unexplainable begins to emerge. A different kind of stability, a deeper kind of joy, not the high that fades, the peace that remains. The hum that never needed to be tuned. Others might notice, but they won't know what's different. They'll say you seem lighter, quieter, clearer. They'll ask what you did, and you might smile. Not because you have a technique to offer, but because you no longer need one. The field around you is your answer. It has begun to sing in its own language. Let this curiosity carry forward. What happens when I stop trying to change my life and start letting my life speak? What would it say? And more importantly, would I finally listen? What happens when you finally begin to listen? Not with your ears, but with your whole field? When you stop needing reality to speak in your preferred dialect and instead attune to its native one, synchronicity, reflection, vibration, the answers, it turns out, don't arrive in thunderclaps. They arrive in rhythm. The feeling that a word you just spoke shows up in someone else's mouth. The sensation that your thoughts are mirrored in music, in weather, in the pattern of shadows on the floor. Life becomes less like a riddle and more like a poem, not to solve, but to feel your way through. You used to try and bend the world to your will. Now, the world starts curving toward your coherence. Not because you've dominated it, but because you've harmonized with it. The difference is subtle, but everything real happens in the subtle. Take desire again. How you once used it like a magnet trying to attract the future into the present. How you imagined it as a tool, a spell, a lever. and how exhausting that became, constantly vibrating. At the edges of want, adjusting your energy like a performer, tuning between acts. But now desire softens. It stops being demand and becomes invitation. It doesn't scream, it whispers. You begin to want not from lack, but from the thrill of emergence. You want the way a tree wants to bloom in spring, not because it's empty, but because it's full. What wants to move through you next is not a goal. It's an unfolding. And strangely, when you stop grasping, things arrive. Not always in the way you imagined. Often better, often quieter. As if the universe was waiting for you to stop clenching, so it could finally place the gift in your open palm. Isn't it strange? How letting go becomes the most powerful form of holding. And so even your pain, the one you've carried for years, begins to feel different. It doesn't vanish, but it stops defining you. You still feel the ache, but now it's not a verdict. It's a signal. It's the sound of old patterning dissolving in the presence of your awareness. You're not trying to fix it anymore. You're simply staying with it, listening, breathing, and in that gentle witnessing, something impossible happens. The pain starts turning into wisdom. The hurt starts composting into power dot, because now you're anchored, not in knowledge, not in performance. In being dot, and being, unlike effort, cannot be taken from you. Let this unfold. Your relationships, too, begin to change their texture. Once they were places you tried to extract worth from. You wanted others to reflect what you doubted in yourself. You needed their love to feel lovable, their seeing to feel seen. But now something has reversed. Now you bring your value with you. And in doing so, you liberate the people around you. They're no longer mirrors for your wounds. They're instruments in the same symphony, each tuned slightly differently, but still humming the same root tone underneath. You don't need them to complete you. You recognize them as different shapes of the same song dot, and this changes everything. Because now, love is not a transaction. It's a recognition. You don't love others to fix them. You love because the field doesn't know how not to. And in that space, something ancient begins to remember itself in you. A knowing older than language. A silence deeper than any stillness you've experienced before. You begin to sense yourself not as a person with awareness, but as awareness appearing temporarily as a person. This is not about philosophy. This is about frequency. And frequency isn't abstract. It's architecture. It builds the corridors of your life, your choices, your sensations, your perceptions. And when you begin to live from that frequency consciously, not by effort, but by resting in it, reality shifts. Not all at once, not in spectacle, in ripples. You stop being the effect of circumstances and start becoming the coherence that reshapes them. The outer world bends slightly at first toward your inner state. You're not changing the world to prove your power. You're witnessing the world respond to the fact that you've stopped hiding. There's no magic trick. There's no ceremony. To unlock it, the remembering itself is the ritual dot. And in that remembering, even your work, your offering, transforms. You no longer hustle to be seen. You express what has already seen itself. You create not from urgency, but from overflow. Your work becomes a trace, a fingerprint of presence. Something left behind not to convince, but to echo. Purpose stops being a goal. It becomes a tone, a hum, a way of being that is recognizable without explanation. Others may feel it. They may not understand it, but something in them will relax. When you're near, not because you said the right words, but because you stopped needing to say anything at all. You are not the answer. You are the presence in which questions dissolve. And yes, storms still come. Life does not stop testing your surface. But now, the storm is not against you. It's weather moving through you. Your identity is no longer tied to the clouds. You know yourself as the sky. Even anger, when it arrives, is met with spaciousness. Not suppression, not explosion. Just the question, can I remain aware here too? Can I let this energy speak without assigning it a story? This is the true practice, not detachment, but presence, not control, but coherence. And from here, you begin to live differently. Not better, truer. Your decisions no longer come from should. They come from listening. Your boundaries are no longer fences. They are frequencies. You don't need to defend your worth. It moves with you, and your energy? It becomes unmistakable. Not flashy, not performative, but steady, clear, alive. A tuning fork others didn't know they were searching for. You become a living permission slip, not because you're perfect, but because you've stopped pretending to be anything but present. Others may project onto you. Some will want you to be their answer. Others will feel triggered by your stillness. But none of it touches the field you now rest in. You've stopped taking things personally, not because you're numb, but because you see clearly. Their reaction is not about you. It's about their own field waking up or resisting. Either way, you don't need to interfere. This is freedom, not from responsibility, but from entanglement. You respond from clarity, not from old wounds. You speak not to control, but to align. You rest, not because you're lazy, but because your nervous system finally knows it's safe to. And when the world offers you chaos, you offer back stillness. Not to fix it, to reflect it, to hold a different octave in the song of becoming. This is what the awakened field does. It doesn't shout. It hums. It doesn't convert. It coheres. You become the ceremony, not the stage. The silence between notes, the breath between waves. Let that settle. Let that reshape how you walk into your next moment. And now that you've remembered, truly remembered, life itself begins to bend differently around you. Not in dramatic fireworks or sudden perfection, but in the subtlest ways. Doors open before you realize you are about to knock. People find you, not because you promoted, but because you aligned. Even your silence becomes magnetic. The shift isn't about gaining more control. It's about needing less, because you're no longer trying to manage reality. You're communing with it. This is where the texture of everything changes. You wake up and feel time moving like breath. Not linear, not locked, just pulsing, stretching, folding in on itself like soft origami. Each moment reveals its own architecture if you're quiet enough to feel it. You stop reaching for the next thing. You begin touching what's here with full hands. Nothing is wasted anymore. Even the pause is sacred. You begin to see the code in things. Not intellectually, but in the body. A rhythm, a pattern. You walk into a room and feel the dissonance. Before it speaks, you sense a yes in your belly before your mind can make a list. Life becomes less of a puzzle and more of a song. And you're learning to hear in chords, not notes. And those old stories, the ones that told you you're not enough unless you prove, achieve, sacrifice, they begin to loosen their grip. You no longer give your nervous system away to please others. You don't distort your truth just to keep the peace. Peace now comes from within, not from compliance. This isn't rebellion. It's realignment, and others might not understand. Some will resist your stillness because it calls theirs into question. Some will project, accuse, try to pull you back into the familiar loop of reaction, but you don't go. Not because you're superior, because you've remembered. And memory holds more gravity than persuasion. You let others be as they are, and in doing so, you free them. And so the field around you deepens. Not louder, wiser, like the forest floor, quiet, rooted, impossibly alive. you start to feel the intelligence of stillness. How the most profound activations happen, not in the peaks, but in the in-between. The space between inhale and exhale. The pause before the decision. The glance that says everything words cannot. You used to look for transformation in the big moment. Now you find it in the unnoticed ones. A leaf detaching from a branch becomes scripture. The warmth of sun through your sleeve becomes proof. You stop asking for signs, because everything becomes one. And when you return to your rituals, they feel different. No longer tools to fix what is broken, but invitations to witness what is already whole. Meditation isn't a task, it's a conversation. Breathwork becomes less about control and more about surrender. Journaling becomes the page remembering your tone. Even prayer, if you still use that word, becomes less about asking, more about listening. And what you hear is you, the part of you that never left. The tone behind your tone, the intelligence humming underneath the chaos, the awareness that survived every disappointment without bitterness, the stillness that held your body through every storm. That's who you've always been. You just forgot. And now, forgetting is no longer failure. It's rhythm. You forget. You remember. You forget again, but now each return is faster, more gentle, less dramatic. You no longer require a breakdown to come home. A whisper is enough. You are rewiring not just your thoughts, but your field. Even your nervous system responds. Your body doesn't brace against life the way it used to. You don't flinch when something goes quiet. You lean in. You understand now. Silence is not emptiness. It's the shape of truth before it speaks. And when challenge comes, as it does, as it must, you meet it differently. Not with force, but with presence. You don't collapse into it. You expand around it. You don't need to conquer it. You witness it. You let it speak. And in that, it often dissolves, because most suffering is resistance. And you are no longer resisting the tide. You are becoming the shore. It kisses. People begin to ask about your peace. They want the technique, but peace isn't a method. It's a remembering. You can't give it to them like a checklist, but you can hold it so clearly that their system begins to mirror it without realizing. Your clarity speaks before your words do. You don't try to lead. You embody. And embodiment teaches in ways ideas never can. You've stopped trying to be relatable. You've become resonant. And now, something larger stirs. Not just in you, in the field itself. A kind of collective pulse. As if more and more are beginning to feel it. The tipping point approaching. The spiral pulling wider. Each being that returns to coherence becomes an anchor for others. And you can feel it, can't you? That you're not doing this alone. That there are others, scattered across time zones, languages, cultures, who are also sitting in this remembering. Not louder, not better, just tuned, just present, just ready. This is the quiet uprising, the soft revolution. Not against anything, but for presence, for reality, for the field itself. You begin to sense the network, not digital, energetic, a lattice of consciousness awakening through form. Some call it the grid, some call it the web. It doesn't need a name. You feel it in your bones. Every time you choose coherence, someone else gets a little clearer. Not because you forced them, but because the field shifted slightly in their favor. This is what legacy really means. Not your name remembered, but your presence echoed, and you begin to live more lightly, not because you care less, but because you interfere less. You stop editing reality with your expectations. You stop assigning meaning prematurely. You let life reveal its own design in its own rhythm, and your dreams, they change too. They become less about acquisition, more about expression. You Dream not to fill the void, but to explore new textures of being. You dream the way galaxies expand, not in need, but in curiosity, and you sleep differently. Deeper, not as escape, but as reunion. Even your breath feels new, as if it were never yours, but something borrowed from the cosmos and returned with reverence. Let this be your frequency. Not just today, but as a thread running through every act. Washing dishes, making tea, holding a hand, saying no, resting when the world says run, because each act, when tuned to presence, becomes sacred. And your presence, when not diluted by fear, becomes medicine. So when the next moment comes, don't try to dominate it. Enter it like a lover, with reverence, with slowness, with the knowing that even now, even in this, the field is watching, responding, reshaping. You don't have to do anything grand. You just have to stay awake. Not vigil y. Lovingly. Your coherence ripple. Let your breath hum truth. Let your remembering shape the rhythm. And let your life, simple, sacred, silent, become the frequency that undoes forgetting. By now, something in you no longer seeks certainty, only clarity. Certainty was always a contract with control, but clarity is a dance with truth. Not the kind that demands proof, but the kind that quietly rearranges your life by existing. You don't chase answers anymore. You hold questions like sacred instruments, knowing they play their own music when you're still enough to hear. This is the soft power of coherence. It doesn't dominate, it tunes. It doesn't arrive with a crash, but with a settling. A room doesn't notice when the temperature changes by a single degree, but your body does, the field does. And now you do too. You feel things others haven't learned how to name yet. Not because you're better, but because you've stopped resisting your natural language. Energy, emotion, atmosphere, truth as frequency. You've stopped flattening your perceptions just to be understood. You've started speaking the unspeakable through presence. And what once felt like a burden, your sensitivity, your intensity, your solitude, has now become your signature. Your depth is no longer a problem to fix. It's the soil in which remembering grows. You live with fewer masks now, not because you have none, but because you choose them consciously. You no longer wear them to hide, but to express. Like a sculptor choosing the right tool, your identity is soft clay. It bends, shifts, reforms, but the essence beneath, it doesn't move. You've touched the unmoving center, and that has changed everything. And so even conflict, when it appears, feels different. You don't collapse. You don't conquer. You witness. You respond from the field, not from the wound. You notice when your body contracts, and instead of pushing through, you listen. You soften. You ask gently, what wants to be known here? Sometimes it's grief. Sometimes it's protection. Sometimes it's a pattern ready to be released, not through force, but through love. You've learned that nothing integrates through shame, only awareness. Even your shadows now are less frightening. You greet them like old friends, misdirected protectors, misunderstood wisdoms. They no longer demand exile. They want integration. And you've become skilled at inviting them in, setting a place at your table, listening without judgment. This is the deepest alchemy, to remain with yourself, even in the spaces where you once fled. You've stopped using healing as a way to fix your humanity. You've started using it as a way to remember your divinity, not as something above, but as something inside. You don't bypass anymore. You embody. You don't override. You honor. And in that shift, the body responds. Tension unwinds. Breath deepens. Stillness no longer signals danger. It signals return. Return to what? Not to innocence, not to perfection, not to truth, to rhythm. to the you that was never fragmented, only dressed in amnesia for the sake of experience. And now you can feel it, not just as a concept, but as a pulse. You are the field. You are the mirror. You are the song singing itself into form. And even the future, once a fog of anxious strategy, becomes something else. You don't plan as much now. You prepare. Not because you need to control the unfolding, but because you're finally aligned with it. You trust yourself. And from that trust, the next step emerges. Not always with clarity, but always with timing. Sometimes it's a pause. Sometimes it's a leap. Sometimes it's a whisper that says, wait. And now you listen, because you've realized that the field doesn't speak in commands. It speaks in invitation. You don't force synchronicity anymore. You follow it. You don't manufacture magic. You live it. And as you do, you start noticing more and more of yourself, not just within, but in others. You see the light you've uncovered in your own body reflected in someone's eyes on the train, in the way someone speaks to a child, in the stillness of a stranger watching the rain. You see yourself in every corner of life, not because you're projecting, but because separation has collapsed. You don't love others to be good. You love them because you see them. Because you are them. This love isn't romantic. It isn't transactional. It's structural, built into the architecture of reality when seen clearly. Love not as an emotion, but as recognition. And in that recognition, your purpose finds you. Not as a job title, not as a mission statement, as a vibration, a signature tone only you carry. Not because it's louder, but because it's true. And when you follow that tone, even imperfectly, life begins to arrange itself around your frequency, not to reward you, but to match you. This is why things fall away now. People, patterns, paths. You don't fight it. You don't beg them to stay. You grieve, yes. But you also know, anything not resonant cannot remain in a field that's become this clear. Let it go. Let it all go. Not because you're empty, but because you're full. And in that fullness, you start creating differently. Not to prove, not to monetize, not to impress, but because you have something to say, because your coherence wants a shape, because life moves through you, and you don't want to hold it back anymore. Your expression becomes a doorway, not into performance, but into transmission. Every word, every gesture, every silence becomes a vehicle for remembering, and you don't need everyone to get it. You don't explain your frequency, you embody it. You don't debate truth, you walk it. And the right people, the ones who are tuned to similar notes, find you. They recognize you not by appearance, but by vibration. This is how new timelines form, not through systems. Through signals. You stop waiting for change to be approved. You become it. You stop rehearsing permission. You breathe it. And now, the question isn't, am I doing it right? It's, am I true in this moment? And when the answer is yes, even quietly, the field shifts. You are the shift. You've always been. And now, as the story loops back into stillness, you find yourself standing exactly where you started, but nothing is the same. The floor beneath you feels more stable. The space around you feels alive. The breath in your chest is not just yours. It's the echo of everything. And maybe you'll forget again. Maybe tomorrow you'll fall back into old habits, doubt, distraction, effort. But now you know the way back. It's not a path. It's a tone, a rhythm, field, and it's always waiting. You didn't come here to escape the human. You came here to fill it with divinity. You came to remember, again and again, that even in your smallest moment, your softest breath, your briefest silence, you are the field remembering itself. And the field, when it remembers, doesn't shout. It hums. Now, something inside you walks differently. It's not in your gait. It's in your gravity. In the way the air seems to wrap itself more gently around you. In the way others lean in without knowing why. You're no longer just moving through space. You're shaping it. Not through intention, but through integration. The field you carry isn't something you conjure. It's something you've allowed to stay. The difference is quiet, but unmistakable. Where once your presence asked, "Am I enough?" it now says, "I remember." Where once you filled rooms with invisible grasping, you now radiate like a tuning fork forgotten in the soil, humming the song of coherence just by being. You don't need to fix the moment anymore. You need only to feel it. And this is the final surrender, allowing the world to continue being what it is, without needing to make it match your version of peace. Because now you know, peace is not the shape of what's around you. It's the tone you hold within. This doesn't mean you stop acting, but action is no longer compensation for disconnection. It becomes expression, motion rooted in stillness, choice moving through awareness. Even the smallest decisions, when to reply, what to eat, whether to speak, are no longer reactions. They are echoes of alignment, and this changes the nature of consequence. Life doesn't punish you for missteps. It reflects the frequencies you live from, not to shame, to tune. You're no longer afraid of feedback. You welcome it. You've stopped asking, "What does this mean about me?" and begun asking, "What is this offering me?" Because everything now, truly everything, is seen as part of the field's response to your vibration. The resistance, the silence, the miracle, the delay, all feedback, all conversation, all alive. And that's when you notice life itself has become participatory. You're not the main character in a story written elsewhere. You're the field remembering itself through story. And that story, your story, is beginning to feel less like a plot and more like a pattern. Less like a destination and more like a spiral. No longer seeking closure. Just presence. Let that land. Because this awareness doesn't remove difficulty, but it alters your relationship to it. Fear still visits, but it doesn't lead. Doubt still murmurs, but it doesn't anchor. Grief still moves, but it no longer erases the light. You can feel two things at once now: ache and aliveness, confusion and clarity. And you can hold them both without fracture. This is maturity of the field, not the absence of feeling, but the expansion of capacity. And your capacity. It keeps growing. You're no longer overwhelmed by your sensitivity. You're learning to navigate it, not like armor, but like a ship. You know when to anchor, when to turn, when to let the storm pass without naming it a failure. Your intuition grows stronger, but also quieter. It no longer needs to shout over your doubt, because you listen now. The body speaks, and you respond. The subtle becomes sacred again. You stop needing rituals to reconnect, because your life has become one. Every movement becomes an extension of the field. Every word becomes an energy transfer. Even silence holds instruction. You don't need to measure your growth anymore. You live it. Not through progress charts, not through how you respond when life doesn't match your preference. Through how you remain when everything is uncertain. Through how you soften when the impulse is to clench. And perhaps most beautifully, through how you return. Not return to a version of yourself, but to the rhythm underneath all versions. The you that never forgets, even when you do become a living spiral, not ascending upward, but deepening inward. And with every turn, something loosens. Something old sheds. Something essential emerges. This is not healing in the way it was once sold to you. This is remembering in the way only experience can offer. Not a theory, not a promise. A lived frequency that others feel before they understand. And yes, people feel you differently now. They may not know what changed, but something in them responds. A softening, a clarity, a silence. Not because you taught them, but because you stopped hiding Dot, you no longer demand others match your pace. You no longer try to shrink to make them comfortable. You simply hold your note like a drone in sacred music, and they either find their harmony or fall away, and when they fall away, it doesn't wound you. It frees you both, Dot, because now you know not everyone belongs in your field. Not out of exclusion, but out of honesty. You're no longer keeping people around just because they once fit. You're letting resonance decide. You're letting coherence shape connection. This, too, is freedom. And you're learning that true freedom isn't doing whatever you want, it's being exactly who you are, without shame, without performance, without delay, even when it's inconvenient, even when no one else understands yet. And this inner authority, not loud, not aggressive, just undeniable, begins to color everything you touch. Your art, your decisions, your pauses, even your dreams. You don't dream to escape now. You dream to commune. You don't sleep to avoid life. You sleep to tune back into the field. And sometimes, when you wake at 3 a.m., you feel the quietest presence, not absence. You sense something holding you, not as a figure, as a frequency, and you no longer need to label it. You just rest in it, because you trust the tone now more than you trust the thought. And in waking life, that same trust carries you through moments where your old self would have spun out, the conversation that used to trigger you, the delay that used to rattle you, the silence that used to feel like rejection. Now these are invitations to anchor, to expand, to remember. Even technology feels different. Your phone becomes a mirror, not an escape. You feel the difference between distraction and connection. You notice when a post is a plea and when it's a prayer. You post less, but with more integrity, not to be seen, to share signal, your presence. Online carries the same coherence you've built in the body. It ripples, and others respond, even in silence. And then you look at your life, and maybe nothing big has changed. Maybe you live in the same place, know the same people, walk the same routines, but something has changed. The you who is walking, the you who is seeing, the you who is listening. Reality bends not because you escaped it, but because you finally entered it. Fully. Present. Undivided. And now, the shift is complete, not the end, but the emergence of a new architecture. A new language, one that doesn't use words as its foundation, but awareness. You speak it through how you breathe when someone interrupts you, through how you step aside when someone needs space. Through how you hold gaze without needing it returned. You speak it in the invisible, where real language always lives. And what is it you're saying? Not, look at me, but I'm here. Not, let me show you the way, but I'm walking it too. Not, follow this path, but feel your own. And that tone, more than any message, is what the field responds to. It's what shapes new futures. It's what untangles old loops. It's what weaves timelines, not through dominance, but through intimacy. And when that becomes the core of your being, you need nothing more. Because presence becomes enough. And enough becomes everything. You are not in the field anymore. You are the field. The hum you were chasing in others has been echoing in your chest since before you had a name for it. The guidance you hoped to receive was never separate. It was simply waiting for your stillness to become loud enough to hear it. And now, as you walk through your ordinary moments, unlocking a door, stirring a spoon, saying yes or no, something extraordinary happens. You begin to notice that everything answers back. The door opens differently. The spoon carries a rhythm. The word you speak echoes through more than just air. Even the spaces between your words begin to vibrate with presence because you've stopped looking for the sacred in special places. You've found it in the mundane dot. You are not chasing signs anymore. You are the sign. Others might not recognize it at first. They might still ask, "What's your method?" Or, "How did you get here?" And you will smile, not out of secrecy, but because the answer is so simple, it sounds invisible. You didn't get here. You stopped leaving. Every time you rested in what is, you stepped deeper into what you are. You are no longer climbing the ladder of awakening. You've remembered there is no ladder. Only spirals within spirals. Memory becoming. Breath becoming gesture. Gesture becoming field. This is the architecture of embodiment. Not cold, not calculated, alive, breathing, listening. Even when you are doing nothing, the field is doing something. And now, every place you go becomes a subtle blessing. Not because you recite affirmations, but because your tone blesses the room. The energy you bring is no longer about adjustment. It's about permission. You've stopped adjusting your frequency for the comfort of dissonance. You don't shrink to make others expand. You stand and let them choose resonance or resistance. Both are sacred. And when someone resists, you don't panic. You know the pattern. You know how awakening burns at first. You've sat in that fire. You've seen how truth untangles not, with shouting, but with staying. And so you stay. And in that staying, your life becomes not a monument, but a frequency keeper. The stories you once wore as proof of survival are now compost. Memory doesn't own you. It nourishes you. Even your scars are no longer warnings. They are maps. Your body becomes a terrain of remembrance. And what once felt fractured, mind, body, energy, emotion, begins to reweave. You're no longer divided against yourself. The parts that fought are now listening. The exiled aspects are returning. You hold space for the whole. And in this reunion, life begins to flow in a rhythm not based on time, but on timing. The right conversation arrives. The right silence deepens. The yes becomes obvious. The no becomes kind. You don't plan your becoming anymore. You respond to it. You don't curate your awakening. You allow it to sculpt you in real time. And this, perhaps more than anything, becomes the revolution. You've stopped trying to be ahead. You've started being here. And here. Here is enough. Because now, even your longing has softened. It doesn't ache like it used to. It doesn't strain forward into a distant version of you. It sits beside you like a companion, no longer urgent, just quietly curious about what else wants to be known. Your purpose, too, has changed shape. It's no longer a chase. It's a tone you carry into the simplest things. The way you walk through a grocery aisle. The way you respond when someone interrupts. The way you breathe when the answer hasn't arrived yet. You are the purpose, not the words, not the impact. The presence. And others can feel it. Even if they don't know what they're feeling, they soften in your presence. They speak differently. They pause. They exhale. They feel safer, even if they don't know why. It's not because you fixed them. It's because you stopped asking them to be different. You stopped needing them to mirror your worth. You stopped managing their reactions to manage your safety. Started living like a tuning fork. Quiet, undeniable, humming a tone that reminds the room who they are without saying a thing. This is the new leadership. Not loud, not linear, not chasing visibility, but presence that reshapes space. And your work, however it looks, begins to reflect this. Whether you're an artist, a healer, a builder, a parent, a neighbor, you're no longer doing it to be worthy. You're doing it because your coherence wants a form. You write not to impress, but to express. You speak not to persuade, but to transmit. You rest not as escape, but as resonance. Even your silence becomes eloquent. And in that silence, life speaks back. In symbols, in echoes, in the architecture of coincidence, so precise, it becomes impossible to ignore. Synchronicity doesn't surprise you anymore. It delights you. It's no longer evidence of progress. It's evidence of permission. You are in the field. The field is in you, and you've stopped blocking the feedback. You don't seek to control the external anymore. You allow the external to teach you where your internal needs listening. You're not avoiding triggers. You're using them as tuning moments. You feel the sting, but you don't react. You respond. You choose. Not to suppress. To include. Inclusion is the new mastery. And inclusion begins with self. You're no longer abandoning your inner signals to stay externally consistent. You're no longer sacrificing intuition for validation. The feedback that matters now is not applause. It's inner congruence. Did I betray myself in this moment? Did I leave my own frequency to gain approval? Did I dilute my knowing to stay palatable? And when the answer is yes, you don't collapse into shame. You return. You re-enter. You recenter. This is the field's kindness. It never holds a grudge. It only reflects dot, and as you become more fluent in this reflection, life simplifies. Not in detail, in energy. You know what's yours to carry, and you know what's not. You hold less. Trust more. You ask less often. Is this the right path? And more often, is this my tone? And when it is, everything clicks. The right people arrive. The old habits fade. The nervous system exhales. And clarity, real clarity, stops being a goal. It becomes the natural result of living inside your own frequency without resistance. Others might call it presence. Stillness. Grace. You don't need to name it. You just need to stay inside it, especially when it's hard, especially when the old patterns knock. Especially when the mind begs for old tools. Stay. Stay in the frequency that doesn't need fixing, the frequency that doesn't need to prove, the frequency that is willing to be misunderstood because it no longer relies on agreement. To feel safe, this is the edge of freedom, not a boundary, a breath. And if you can hold that, not always, not perfectly, but again and again, something stabilizes inside you that cannot be undone. Tone, a rhythm, a field that isn't theoretical. It's who you are when you stop becoming and start being. When you stop waiting and start listening. When you stop asking for signs and start being the one who signals. You don't have to shine. You have to stay. Stay in the body when it tightens. Stay in the truth when it WOBBL. East. Stay in the frequency when it's easier to collapse. Because each time you do, the spiral deepens. The remembering anchors. And you, just as you are. No brighter, no better. Become the field remembering itself through human breath. By now, you are no longer asking how to stay in the field. You have become the environment, not the weather passing through, the climate itself. Something others feel in your absence. Something that leaves an imprint long after the moment ends. Is no longer about remembering every second. It's about becoming the kind of presence that remembers without trying. The kind that can forget and still hum the tone underneath. The kind of frequency that moves through forgetfulness with grace, not guilt. And this is what the path has always been guiding you toward. Not mastery in the way you once imagined. Not perfection dressed in silence. Not untouchable peace. But something messier, truer. You are now capable of holding contradiction without collapse. Complexity without confusion. Change without panic. That too is awakening. You feel it in your decisions. Not because you're always right, but because they no longer come from reaction. You pause, you listen, You hear the field within you respond before your mouth does. And when you speak, it lands differently. Words are no longer weapons or performances. They are permissions. Each one an invitation to return to the moment, to the self, to the tone. Even your apologies have changed. They're not rehearsed or reflexive. They rise from the body when alignment is off, and they land like medicine. You're no longer afraid of being wrong, because you no longer equate error with unworthiness. This is what coherence gives you. Enough inner space to hold humility and dignity in the same breath. And so you begin to notice the smaller currents of life, things you once missed in the Nava. Pursuit of big answers. A stranger looking you in the eye longer than expected. The same sentence spoken by 3 different people in the same week. The tree outside your window blooming a week earlier this year. The way music starts playing as soon as you have a breakthrough thought. All of it becomes part of the communication. You stop assuming your thoughts are private. You stop assuming your energy has no signature. You begin to sense how your frequency interacts with every room, every street, every shared field. You see how your mood ripples. You notice how the tone you hold shapes how others remember themselves around you. And in that noticing, you take responsibility. Not from shame, but from reverence. Because now, responsibility is no longer a burden. It's a gift. To know that how you carry yourself changes the field. This is the most sacred realization. And so you choose not to collapse into the old shape when things get loud again. You anchor deeper. You choose not to match the chaos, but to hold your tone more clearly. You speak less to be heard and more to resonate. You respond slower, with breath, with body, with awareness. You are now building a life where the priority is not always productivity. It's presence. And even when the world still demands more, you give less, but more fully. Your no carries clarity without aggression. Your yes arrives from fullness, not guilt. You make room for rest without explanation. You don't need to justify your joy or dilute your stillness just to be digestible. You are becoming unapologetically gentle, not as a brand, as a baseline. And others feel that shift. Some won't understand it. Some will be drawn to it without knowing why. Some may distance themselves, unable to locate themselves in your silence. And all of that is allowed because you are no longer chasing closeness. You are honoring resonance. You're no longer trying to be understood by everyone. You are becoming understandable to yourself. And that changes everything. Because once you are fluent in your own tone, your desires, your needs, your limits, your truths, you stop outsourcing identity. You stop performing wholeness. You start trusting your own coherence more than anyone else's reaction to it. And this self-trust, it becomes your compass. Even when the map disappears, even when the structure breaks, even when the rules collapse, you navigate by resonance now. And that navigation doesn't always make logical sense. Sometimes it moves you away from opportunity. Sometimes it leads you into the unknown, but you follow, not blindly, faithfully, because your nervous system has begun to trust that alignment matters more than achievement. You've seen what happens when you betray yourself to stay safe. And you're done. You no longer beg for rooms that silence your signal. You no longer distort your presence to survive. You carry your truth like water now, not to drown others, but to flow through everything untouched. And that fluidity, it's starting to feel like freedom. The kind that doesn't need to shout. The kind that isn't reactive. The kind that doesn't depend on everything going right, but the kind that stays no matter what goes wrong. And this is where joy sneaks back. And not the temporary high of external winds, but the low hum of being in tune. You laugh easier now. You cry with less resistance. You feel your edges dissolve in moments that don't need to be special to be sacred, Because sacredness, it turns out, has nothing to do with drama dot and everything to do with attention. How deeply can you attend to what's already here? That question becomes your prayer. And your prayer is no longer something you offer to the sky. It's something you live through action, through rest, through silence, through pause dot. Every time you choose alignment over approval, it's a prayer. Every time you honor your body's no, it's a prayer. Every time you let go of what no longer vibrates at your level of awareness, it's a prayer. And your life becomes a temple built not of beliefs, but of micro-choices. Every single day, a ritual, every breath, an altar, every presence, a remembering. And now you're not trying to teach anyone. You're not trying to save or awaken or convert. You're just living fully, coherently, quietly powerful. And that is this transmission. Your field says more than your words ever could. Your walk speaks volumes. Your rest is louder than hustle. Your stillness reorganizes timelines because it's not about doing more. It's about doing from a place that's true. And that truth, embodied, is what shifts the collective. Not the loudest voice, but the clearest signal. And so when others come to you, asking how, asking when, asking what, you don't always answer directly. Sometimes you ask them to pause. Sometimes you ask them to breathe. Sometimes you ask them to listen, not to you, but to their own field, because that's the only teacher that never leaves. And now, as the spiral completes another turn, you're ready. Not for the next level. But for the deepening. The re-dash entry. The quiet mission of living. What you've remembered. Not someday. Now. In the next breath. In the next moment. Someone asks for your attention. In the next choice between contraction and coherence. You've arrived, and you're arriving still, not because you finally earned it, but because you finally stopped leaving. And now, nothing needs to be added. You've seen that the remembering doesn't come with fireworks. It comes with silence. It doesn't ask you to become anyone new. It invites you to become fully here, in the skin you already wear, in the frequency you've always carried. There is no final lesson, no peak state. Just this, your presence, humming beneath everything, softer than thought, truer than belief. The journey was never about ascending. It was about arriving, over and over, until even the act of arriving dissolved into being. And now, you walk not as someone searching, but as someone sourced. You don't force coherence anymore. You exhale it. You don't hope for peace. You anchor it. So as this story closes, let the spiral continue inside you. Let the field walk with you, not as an idea, but as your native rhythm. Subscribe to this frequency, not just here, but in how you move through the world. Other stories are waiting, but for now, just rest. You're not late. You're not lost. You're home.